Uh, this Ben Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends. It's November the 4th, 1977, and I'm with Dr. Claude B. Knight of Wewoka. Dr. Knight has been a doctor here for quite some time. He's a graduate of the University of Oklahoma School of Medicine. He was the division surgeon, and I believe he was also, for a period, both commander of the 120th at a time and division surgeon at a time for the 45th Infantry Division in the Korean War. We'll talk some about that. We'll talk some about Wewoka and his experiences there. I'd like to begin with for you to tell who your parents are or were, and where they came and how the family came to be in this part of the country.
My mother's name was Rose Humphrey before she married my father, Walter Leon Knight. They were married in Missouri, and then after he had been down here in Indian Territory for a few months looking over the situation to see if he wished to come here and practice, went back to Missouri and married her and brought her back to Wewoka in the Indian Territory to begin his practice of medicine. Both my parents are deceased. He continued to practice here until 1938 when he expired, and she died in about 1950.
I want to get into your move right up rather quickly to your medical career. You went to school where to?
I got my AB at Phillips University, and then my MD degree from the University of Oklahoma at Oklahoma City, graduating from there in 1935, and then following 2 years of hospital work, I returned to Wewoka to begin practice with my father.
You entered practice here about 1937.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Now, you entered active duty. Why don't you tell about your we'll talk more briefly about World War II since you were not with the Oklahoma Division. We'll talk to more extent about the Korean War because of it being the Oklahoma connection. What was your World War II experience?
My World War II experience was primarily with the Air Force. I was an air evacuation officer, medical officer, and was assigned to an evacuation unit and helped evacuate casualties out of the South Pacific.
You were a what did you come out? What rank did you come out there?
A captain.
You were a captain. Now you went into the. When did you go into the Oklahoma National Guard?
Soon after returning home after World War II.
In what capacity were you there?
As a captain. Soon received my majority.
And
soon
you
after
were what
that.
then? What was your?
I was
capacity?
Commander of medical company in the field artillery.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you entered when the 45th was called in, what position were you holding there?
I was commander of a medical company.
Why don't you tell about some of the problems that you were involved in going into the active duty? To discuss a little bit about the call to active duty for the Korea War, the organization, some of the things that happened, any reminiscences you have there.
The call to active duty, of course, I thought, well, I won't be going. I'll be disqualified because of a physical disability, namely I've got a hernia. So when I go to Fort Sill, I think, well, they're not going to use me. But immediately this doctor proceeded to tell me it was of no consequence, and therefore I was ready for active duty. We go down to Louisiana, have a very small company of less than 20, and we are immediately saddled with the problem of the inoculation of the incoming active duty people, physical examinations, and then the treating of injuries. And until the draftees started coming in to join our company, we were really saddled with work and really worked hard.
Do you remember any specific stories or any problems that happened that might be worth recalling in connection with that period at Camp Polk?
Nothing except the sad living quarters that my family had in town. Uh, it's not in connection with the 45th, but it was while on active duty with the 45th there in Louisiana that I was first elected to the school board here in Wewoka. I wasn't even in Wewoka when I was elected to the school board, which position I have had since then. But there were no particular incidents or unusual incidents that occurred while in Louisiana. When we left Louisiana, I was picked in the advance party to fly to Korea, and that's when I left the medical company there.
To Korea there or to Japan?
I mean to Japan.
So you flew direct from to Japan ahead of the boat movement.
Yes, I was with the advance party that flew in.
What did you do there?
There we. You mean in the advance party?
Yes, your advance party. What did you all do?
Well, looking over the medical. My duty was to look over the medical establishments and find out where these places were and how I would be using them, because I had now been assigned to the duty as of division surgeon, and it was my duty to find out what medical facilities were going to be available for the division when it arrived in Japan.
Who did you replace as division surgeon? Is that Dr. Miles? Or?
No, this was an Oklahoma City man who did not go to Japan with us. I cannot tell you his name.
Yes. So how far ahead of the group did you get there? Ahead of the general?
About 2 weeks, because the division came by boat through the Panama Canal, and they were sometime getting there.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall some of the experiences that you may have had, or in your relationships maybe with those you were dealing with and checking out hospitals and that sort of thing during that period, that 2-week period?
Well, one of the first things I remember was winding up in the hospital myself as a patient because of a urinary hemorrhage, and being accused of having a venereal disease because I had a hemorrhage from my kidneys. But this is the farthest thing from my mind at that time. But I was really frightened because of the severe hemorrhage, and that's usually an ominous sign as far as cancer is concerned. And so that was the first thing that had to be ruled out as far as I was concerned, that I wasn't arriving in Japan with a malignant lesion of the kidney, and that was very well handled by the Tokyo General Hospital.
How long were you in the hospital?
About 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall any experiences in the hospital that might be of interest, worth recalling?
Not particularly. I was. That was my first view of the war casualties that were coming in, and it was really a little depressing to me at the first time, because I hadn't seen casualties like this in my practice or anywhere.
You hadn't seen them in World War II?
Not like this.
You were doing evacuating work?
I was doing evacuating, but you don't evacuate acute cases like we were seeing there in the Tokyo General Hospital.
Mm-hmm. So you went from there on up to take over as division surgeon?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk about the Japan experience. Think of the training situation that took place. You were at Camp Crawford, right. But you were also out in the field a great deal in connection with problems that existed. Let's talk about the training that took place in Hokkaido, looking at it from the standpoint of medical units.
All right. After we had been there a while, and I was in my capacity as division surgeon, it became evident that the medical battalion training was not what the commanding general desired, and my assignment was changed from division surgeon to medical battalion commander to go into a more extensive and a better training program for the medical battalion. And that was a most interesting assignment, one of the best ones I think I ever had, because to establish the training program and get the medical battalion in shape and to go on to Korea.
What were some of the greatest problems you had?
The actually getting across to some of the junior officers that certain regulations and certain procedures were to be followed, or they would be transferred and would no longer be assigned to this unit.
Did you have to transfer any?
Yes, there were some that were transferred.
Mm-hmm. What were the difficulties? I'm not thinking of the people involved necessarily, but what were some of the problems that caused people to have to be transferred out?
Well, just lack of discipline and from company commanders on down, and lack of respect for authority.
Do you feel that this may be because of the type of work that they're doing? Do you feel it's more difficult to develop a military type discipline among doctors and professional people than, say, among ordinary people?
Oh, I think without a doubt, because doctors as a rule are pretty independent-minded people. Right at that time, however, we did not have a good supply of doctors. We had only about 7 or 8 in the medical battalion, and but doctors are sometimes hesitant on taking orders that they feel maybe are not justified.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any problems where a doctor had to be transferred away?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And this dealt with being able to cope with or adjust with the type of situation, I presume.
Right.
Mm-hmm. When they transferred a doctor, where would they transfer them?
As a rule, clear out of the division.
Mm-hmm. In other words, into another medical situation, but out of the division.
Right.
Mm-hmm. What did you feel was the general attitude of course, some of these doctors, had served it was their second round, and of course, a lot of people resented having a second round, even though they were in the Guard, and sometimes doctors resented it maybe a little bit more than some of the others, or at least some doctors did. Did you find this to be a problem?
Not really. I think it just takes a little while to adjust. Remember, this is a group of civilian people who are suddenly thrown into a military atmosphere and a different type of practice. They're practicing more a preventative type medicine with troops than they are with actual treatment, which they have been trained.
Do you recall any experiences in let's think of unusual injuries or that sort of thing that happened in the Hokkaido situation, or any unusual experiences dealing with patients, hospitals, or such?
Not really. Not just the usual accidents with the movement of troops that would occur all the time, and sometimes the accidents would be severe enough that these patients would have to be moved by air, and this was a new experience both for our doctors and for the enlisted personnel. And that helped to make it a little more interesting.
Did you have many deaths in Hokkaido?
The division didn't have too many, no.
Mm-hmm. I remember one accident on a parachute landing. Of course, that was an immediate death, but only involving examination, I guess. What about diseases? What diseases were most common and most problem in Hokkaido?
Oh, the respiratory diseases bothered us more than anything. There was not much trouble with gastrointestinal diseases because there were no native restaurants or cafes that where the diseases of this nature would be acquired. There, before the division moved up the front, there was some increase in venereal disease. It wasn't as bad in Korea as it had been in Japan.
You quite an effort was made to keep the troops from eating the to keep. Is that one side? Oh, okay. Now the move to Korea. How did your group move to Korea, and how did you move your battalion to Korea? I know you have to be able to handle medical problems both in Japan and Korea at the same time.
Well, I flew over, but the unit went by boat, and I was over there and ready to receive them by the time they came.
Did you have, in case of a tremendous medical problem that might have happened during that interim, how were you prepared to take care of it?
The medical battalion had an evacuation hospital and had hospital beds where these patients could be treated up on the front line and accumulated until such time as they could be moved either by ambulance or by helicopter.
Let's take Korea and the period that we're there and the medical problems that you dealt with there.
Well, one of the first medical problems we had to deal with was the cold, because we moved over to Korea right at Christmas time, and then we hadn't had that much cold in Korea. It was a different type of, we hadn't had that much cold in Japan. It was a damper cold in Korea, and we were more subject to frostbite and cold injury there. So that was our first problem. Then in the beginning we were in reserve, so we did not have too many casualties, and it was not until the division was up on the line that we began to have casualties. After we were back in Korea, then I was reassigned to the division surgeon's office, because a man had come in who was quite capable of commanding the medical battalion, and I was returned to the division staff.
Well, didn't Dr. Mark Johnson take over, or was it later that he took over?
He took over at the time before we even moved into Korea, I believe.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the problems of some of the unique problems that you may have had in the medical area and with your battalion and your companies on the line during the Korean situation? Do you recall any instances or any particular illnesses or things that may stand out?
There were no particular. I'm assuming that you have reference possibly to epidemics or illnesses that might have been peculiar to that terrain, but we really didn't have any more. The troops were well fed and well clothed, and housing was quite adequate, even though it was intense. But the heating for these units was quite adequate, and there was no more respiratory disease there than in civilian life.
Talk about how the furthest front field hospital, your battalion aid station, is set up. Kind of describe its organization and how it's how it is set up on the near the front.
Well, the closest thing to the front, of course, is the medical companies that were attached to it. Then back of that, the medical battalion would be the first place for definitive treatment in the way of intravenous fluids and possibly some acute surgery. But most of the time the medical battalion would evacuate back to what was known as evac hospitals, which were possibly 5 to 10 miles back of the medical battalion aid stations.
Tell about the company, how the medical company was set up, and how its own aid station was set up.
Now, when you say medical company, you're not referring to the medical battalion.
I'm thinking of your medical company really formed your what would be your battalion aid station.
That's right.
That's what I want to
the
talk about.
first echelon of medical care.
Yes.
They're the first ones to see the man if he's injured, and they would say he's shot and there's a litter case. They'll see that he gets to a litter, back to a collecting point, and then it would be up to the medical battalion through their ambulance company to move him back to the medical battalion station. And there he would be given further definitive treatment and checked to see if he was in condition to be evacuated further to the rear. The medical company enlisted man had to be a knowledgeable man as far as medicine was concerned, because he was the aid man. The first aid man was the first one to see an injured man, and these people, in my opinion, are very, very important people in the echelon of medical care. And we had good men in our aid companies.
You want to describe the tentage and equipment that they had at that level, at the battalion aid station level. That would be your medical company.
Oh, well, they were just tents, and they did have heating stoves and equipment, but they could start intravenous therapy, but that is just about the extent. Splints and bandages to stop bleeding before the man was evacuated.
Why don't you tell about those helicopters that you had that carried the stretchers outside to the outside that you'd strap them in? Can you describe those?
Well, they would have the racks on each side of the helicopter, and with pods or covers that could be slipped over the head portion, and these were used for short distances, evacuation maybe over a hill and back to a main road, or back to a medical battalion. These were not used for extensive air evacuation or long distances. These were just used for short distance evacuation.
This began in the Korean War, this type of evacuation, didn't it?
I believe that's right, as far as I know.
I had never seen them before, and
that was my first experience with the helicopter evacuation.
And I think when they came in, that it was a kind of a new thing. I rode one of those to do a story, and inside strapped into one. Yeah, so you had that experience.
I never did like to ride them. I rode in a helicopter one time in this bubble type thing where everything's behind you and nothing in front of you as you're flying along.
I rode in the stretcher to do a story. You had to strap me in.
Well, I'm glad you rode in the stretcher instead of me.
Oh, you kind of shake a little bit when it does.
Right.
Now, you came back. Do you recall any highlights of the Korean experience that might be worth mentioning?
Well, I know I was one of the last ones of the original division personnel to return to the States because of the difficulty in securing medical personnel to replace people throughout the division. The medical battalion commander returned before I did, and all the medical unit officers that I knew were gone. Our general had gone, and a new general had come in, and
General Ruffner.
Ruffner, right. And I returned, I believe it was about in August.
Why don't you talk a little about General Styron and General Ruffner? They were your two bosses. They were very much different types of people. Why don't you describe the two people? General James Styron and the first one.
Well, of course, I had known Styron all the way through the activity, and maybe Styron knew me and knew what he could leave up to me to do, and he knew what I was capable of doing, and I never had many words with this man. The new general coming in didn't know me too well, and I can't say that he was really critical of my performance, but I think like any commanding officer, he would like to have had a medical officer of his own choosing.
He was rather cool and rather very completely military in his setting.
Extremely. I mean, he was. I wouldn't call him a friendly man, whereas General Styron to me was very a personal man, but Ruffner was all business and never joking. Everything was always serious.
Yeah. When did you leave?
When did I leave Korea?
Yes.
It was August.
You in August?
August or September.
Oh, you got back after I did. I got back in August. Late July, almost August.
I think I had a total of either 50 or 51 months out of that 2 years that we were supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes.
It was delayed, and then when I did return, I remained at the hospital at Fort Sill for surgery on that hernia, which I thought was going to keep me out, but it didn't.
Finally got it fixed when it was all over.
I finally got it fixed when it was all over.
There's such a shortage of doctors they didn't have time before, did
No.
You stayed in the National Guard, and you became in the reorganization. You remained as division surgeon.
That's right, and I remained in the Guard until 1966, when my practice just demanded that I spend more time at it, and the division policy of training began to require 1 weekend a month away from home, and this was difficult. See, this would, as I returned from Korea and began practice, this is the third time in my life that I had started the practice of medicine.
I want to switch gears and talk about something which is neither military nor medicine, but deals with the Woka, in which I know you've played a role, and I'd like to talk about a little bit, and that's the Sorghum Mill. I think you were the person who was instrumental in this in getting this Sorghum Mill for the museum. I want you to tell about it. How did it come about? How was it discovered, and how it operated, and the Sorghum Festival, and everything about it?
Well, a man by the name of Paul Dodd and I talked about this sorghum bit for some time, and then Mr. Dodd was able to locate a sorghum mill, and so it seemed to just grow from there, and we decided that it was just time that we just had a sorghum festival and get everybody involved in it, and it just kind of like Topsy, it just grew with a little bit of work from everybody.
Describe it. How did it operate?
How does the sorghum mill operate? Well, number one, you've got the mill which squeezes the juice out of the cane. Of course, you first got to grow this cane, so we go to a man in town here and ask him if he'll grow the cane. He says, yes, I'll grow it, but I'll sure not strip it. That's where the work comes in. So then we turn to the agriculture class at high school. They go out and strip the cane. They bring it in. Then we get our donkeys, and a large pole is attached to the top of this round mill. The mill is basically two iron cylinders that roll, and the cane is pushed between these cylinders, and the juice is squeezed out of it. Then once the juice is squeezed out and collected in a barrel, it is poured into a pan which rests over a furnace where there's a hot fire, and it boils. And it has to be skimmed all the time from the foam and that comes off of the juice. And as it is skimmed and the juice moves to the opposite end of the pan, it becomes thicker and thicker until finally at the other end of the pan it is drained off into another barrel and through a strain to keep the flies out of it and the trash that might be blowing or the leaves. And from there it is poured into the container that is to be sold in. It's been a lot of fun, and a lot of old timers have really enjoyed seeing that old time sorghum mill work.
Where did the mill come from? What part of it? It was in this area.
It was found here in the what we call the Seminole Nation area or Seminole County. And when Mr. Dodd found it, he offered to buy it from an old gentleman, and he did, and donated it to the museum. It was out from town here about 5 or 10 miles. I don't know the exact location or the party that he got it from.
Had this been sorghum country here?
Oh yes, I remember as a child many times going out with my father and seeing sorghum made. When my father maybe go to the country in his horse and buggy, and I as a child saw it. And I don't think after that I'd seen any sorghum made until we had this mill here on the museum grounds. And this is true for a lot of other people in town too.
Seems like this could be over the years a drawing card, kind of like the snake hunt for you think of some contests and some other things, kind of like the snake hunt at O'Keene and the cow chip throwing contest at Beaver and some of those that out of this sorghum thing that there might be some sort of festival that could grow and bring people from other places.
Well, it's odd that you should ask such a thing as this, because next year we're planning on, right now, a week's fall festival. This year we added apple cider making to our sorghum days and Indian fry bread cooking. And no telling what we'll add next year, but we intend to make it a several-day affair. And we sure hope you're here to try that sorghum.
Right, sounds good. I think I might come down. You're vice president, or have served in as a leader actually for quite from the beginning on the Historical Society. We got quite a bit from Margaret Jane Norman on that, but want to talk a little about the museum and the people involved in putting together the Indian Nation Museum, Seminole Indian Nation Museum.
Well, you know what? Originally, back in 1966, Wewoka celebrated the centennial founding of the city. We put on a big pageant, and from that, there was some monies left over, and this was put in the bank and just continued to draw interest. And then, as time went on, different groups about the town would talk about a museum and a little mini museum, which meant one showcase full of artifacts at the local library. And then one day some men and women talked more and more about it, and I like to take credit for talking Mrs. Norman into the job of heading the museum and being president of the organization when we established it. And we had a drive here for founding members, and it just really started off good, and we had the community building available to where we could bring our artifacts, and it was just amazing the number of early day items that people brought in, and we acknowledged these and recorded them, and we made some mistakes along the way, but we think we have a marvelous museum which shows history of the early day areas, some things that we're not proud of that happened in the past, but we're proud of some of the things that are happening now.
You served quite a number of years on the school board, and first elected while you were in the Army. Had you been nominated before you were called? How did that come about?
The I'd been interested. My father was on the school board for years prior to his death, but the post on the school board was vacant in the area of the town that I lived in. That post became vacant, and a good friend of mine who was on the school board suggested that I be nominated, and I was, and my name was placed on the ballot, and without any opposition. Otherwise, I can't see why anybody would elect a man in active duty to the school board.
How did you serve those first 2 years?
Well, I didn't serve. The school board just had a four-man board without me in attendance.
What has been your highlight on the school board of events that have happened as far as changes and that sort of thing?
Well, to me, for a short while, I was president of the school board, and the most wonderful thing I think has happened is a tremendous number of new young teachers that were acquired during this time, and also the building of a new elementary school, completely air-conditioned, and one of the first, if not the first, open classroom type building in the state. It was an innovation, really, in education here in Oklahoma, which we're justly proud.
You and I could talk probably another couple hours, but because we got a program in 1 hour and we've got to take about three, I think we'll close now. And maybe next time we come over, we'll start where we left off.
And don't forget that sorghum next year.
Right, okay. Well, this has been an interview with Dr. Claude Knight at Wewoka, Oklahoma on November the 4th, 1977.